Well, g'day. It's Dave here again. Um, I'm using a different program. I upgraded my computer and ended up, I upgraded the software on my computer and ended up with a bunch of stuff that, as you always do, hasn't yet caught up. So this is a bits and pieces. I'll have to sort of edit it through a movie program and the rest to do it properly. But I'm hoping it'll turn out all right. What I'm going to do is take you through the American Journal of Industrial Medicine article called Global Estimates of Fatal Work-Related Diseases. And there's a few points I want to just pull out of it, and there's a few, and then I'm going to show you how to take some data out of it, and I'll put that data up on the site, and you can play with it and make graphs with it and do what you like. And just this is really about two things. It's mostly about some of the ideas that they put forward, and then ways of getting some comparison between countries. I feel fairly strongly about this because I think what you see is that though we have increased our ability to have good workplaces, one of the ways we've done it is to shift dangerous occupations and poor quality operations through to third world countries, and the consequence is still the same or far worse in many respects. And we're all guilty of this because we all buy products made in these countries. And there's been, as you know, a fair bit about it. I mean, I try and do my bit by by buying coffee from countries that are supposed to be good. I think everybody does their bit here and there, but in the end you're fairly much stuck with it. But as an organisation, when you're working for an organisation in OC Health and Safety, pardon me, there's no reason why you can't view it this way. Sorry, I'm unable to actually pause the recording, so if I'm coughing and carrying on, I apologise for it, but at least the birds aren't yelling, although you may hear a duck in the background. Okay, so if you'd like to open up your global estimates thing, if you've got a program that can do nice little doovers like I've got here, where you can sort of pen them across, then you might want to do this kind of thing as well. I always find, generally speaking, at the very beginning of an article, there's there's a kind of brief description of what's going on. And so I'll just go through that description first of all, so you've got some idea of where the article's going. It's a good idea to have that if you're, and that's one of the reasons for what they call an executive summary, although I detest them. They're useful in some respects. So the background is of work-related mortality. And so first, right at that point, we've got to know what is mortality, because they're going to talk about what work-related mortality is. Mortality, death, end of story, is a relatively new concept which aims to widen occupational health and safety, to take into account not only recognised fatal occupational accidents and diseases, but also other work-related deaths. Now, I think I've talked about this in the past. If you're looking purely at the data set that you've got from work, all you will see probably is that work-related deaths and injuries from the organisation itself. Now, more often than not, that's hiding a lot of other death and injury and sickness, particularly sickness, pardon me, down the track where the person is no longer an employee of that business. They say their methods, estimates are calculated using baseline world mortality scenarios of all diseases for the year 2000, and so it's reasonably recent, which is good, and attributable fractions made for work-related diseases in Finland as adjusted. So they're using Finland as a sort of a base model. saying that they can get fractions from the Finnish experience. And one of the reasons is that Finland's been very, very good at collecting data over long periods of time. So, it's not unusual to find Finnish data that's got a 60-year breadth in it, which is extraordinary and almost impossible to find anywhere else. It's estimated that about 2 million work-related deaths take place annually. Men suffer 2/3 of those deaths, which is interesting, is it not? There's the biggest group of work-related diseases are cancers, circulatory diseases, and communicable diseases. Now that shocked me. I was thinking, communicable diseases, what the hell does that, what does that involve, and how high are they, and where are they? It's not something I would have immediately thought of. And they conclude that information about work-related diseases is needed for prevention. As people in developed countries are working longer, the age of retirement is being raised in many countries, which is true to Australia as well. As a result, workers are being exposed to different kinds of substances and working conditions for a longer time. In developing countries, work exposures may already start in infancy. Due to industrialisation, workers in developing countries are facing new conditions with a lack of relevant knowledge and skills. With the help of information, nations can direct resources and skills for appropriate purposes, such as regulatory measures on health and safety at work. Which is, now what it's saying is, there's no reason why, if I'm purchasing into my organisation particular products, why I can't, there's a contract involved in it, and there's no reason for me in the organisation as a health and safety professional, there's no reason for me not looking at this in a global scale. And so it is a global scale that we look at, in the sense where I'm taking a contract and I say to the person who's producing it, I want to know what conditions your workers are working under, because we have, as an organisation, a concern for that. Well, hopefully you've got an organisational concern for it. Okay, I'll stop here for a second and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'll just move this over here. Right, so what we're talking about here is variables again. And this is just another proof that variables are a real problem with this. And so I've just run a little slide up here. So the question is that, what's this article talking about in terms of variables? Well, it has defined two different things. It defines occupational disease and work-related disease. So it says there's two different types of, these would look normally, in fact they look a bit much the same as in terms of what you would read: occupational disease, work-related disease. I wouldn't think there's much difference there, but in fact you can see there is quite a big difference here. First of all, they talk about occupational disease as diseases that result from exposure to risk factors during a work activity, right? So that's what we more often than not capture in our data. When you talk about work-related diseases, though, it's a far wider concept, it says, and it covers diseases that have been shown in an association with work. For example, work-related cancer, musculoskeletal disorders, psychosocial problems, and circulatory disease. Now, I'll just go back to that a bit, just to sort of flesh that a little bit out. What's the difference then? So we've got work-related cancers aren't going to actually show up, often don't show up, like mesothelioma. It didn't show up for about 30 years or so, or more even, where a worker was exposed to it. And I was just reading today that and there are pictures now of children playing in the dust, the dust that caused the mesothelioma, and they got pictures of them Yeah, they used to play around like it was sandpit stuff. So God knows what's happened to those people now. And they're well into middle adulthood. So that would be a work-related cancer of sorts. Musculoskeletal disorders. Well, I've got 3 collapsed discs as a result of spending most of my younger life as a labourer working, lifting very heavy objects, and it resulted in my last 3 discs being corrupted and over again, and the consequence now is that I have to use a wheelchair to get around, basically, because my spine is bone on bone for at least the last 3 or 4 discs. So that causes a lot of pain if I stand up and try walking. Psychosocial problems. Jobs themselves can be very depressing. For instance, it used to be said, and I'm not sure what the stats really are on this, it used to be said that dentists had a very high rate of suicide, but certainly you find people who work in particularly stressful scenarios, people who work in third world countries, for instance, and are frustrated on a constant basis with not having enough or proper tools to carry out the jobs they want to carry out. Sorry, I've got a parrot under my shirt, it's driving me crazy. And so psychosocial problems can occur over quite a period of time afterwards. For instance, there are more people, and this is a stat which I need to check up on to be sure, but apparently there are more people in the States who have committed suicide who were Vietnam veterans than were actually killed in the whole of the Vietnam War. More Americans committed suicide subsequently. It's not me making that noise, okay? It's a parrot. He's grumpy. Sorry about that. I made the mistake of getting up to get some food, and it's woken them all up. Circulatory diseases, which is generally like heart failure and strokes, or heart disease and strokes, are really common as well. Particularly, long-term places where you're working in an occupation which you don't get out much, you don't do much, you sit, sedentary work, particularly sort of clerical work, for instance, where you might just be sitting down watching a computer all day. And I say this while I'm sitting down watching a computer all day, so I know what that's like. And I've got heart failure as well, although not caused from that. But these are all work-related diseases, but you can't, for instance, I can't go back and pin my musculoskeletal disorders on the factories that I worked in Leeds in the north of the UK in 1972, even though I know that's where it all started. It was from lifting, 110 kilo weights basically, and 80 kilo weights, very usual in warehouse work to carry these things up and lift them up on your shoulders, and working on building sites with, if you weren't a real man if you didn't carry at least 2 bags of cement, one on each shoulder, So, and that really played havoc with my back over the period of time. So these things come out later. How do you actually relate these to data? That's the trouble. They go on to say, in relation to work, can be assessed through an attributable factor. Now, this is an interesting little phrase that they talk about here. The proportion of the total burden of the disease, and I've highlighted these, so the proportion of the total burden of the disease that is related to a given risk factor in a population. In this case, it's related to work. So, go back to that. It's the proportion of the total burden of disease. So, say you've got 100%, you take 100% of people who've got bad backs, right? You say what proportion of that 100% is related to work. In this case, it's a given risk factor. and this given risk factor is work. So does that make better sense? It's the fraction of the disease that would not have occurred if the risk factor had not existed. So, pardon me. I'll just stop here for a second. Okay, so I'm going to go on and explain this now a little bit better than I was, I think, before. So basically, if you've got, for instance, if you've the total burden of disease, in other words, the total amount of disease in any one population, and don't forget a population is who you're looking at. So a population can be as small as a village, or it can be just your organisation. This is a population is a term which is specifically used in statistics to notify, to say what it is you're actually looking at, the population that you're looking at, the population of this disease factor in the population. So you've got to define what that is as well. And these guys are trying to define the whole world. Essentially, they're saying they're looking at, what's work-related death for the entire world population, which is a pretty big ask. So we're looking once again work-related disease, not just occupational diseases, and we're looking to see what fraction of that disease would not have occurred if the risk factor had not existed. Well, now you've got some problems, some big problems here. There's, as they say, work-related morbidity and mortality, and people often use those two different terms in medical parlance, if you like. Morbidity is illness, sickness. Mortality is death. Okay, so some diseases give you some problems, kill you, and others don't. Basically, others make you disabled. Not unlike myself, proudly disabled I am. Can't be easily calculated, those things, which is probably the saying of the year. You can't. Work-related morbidity and mortality cannot be easily calculated, but the reasons include the lack of reliable information and records, and because we haven't really been a data age for more than about 20 years. We haven't had the ability to crunch large amounts of data, until the sort of early 1980s. Really, we started to get computers that were able to crunch. But I worked on computers before 1980, and we had punch cards. It was for those of you who are too young to remember, which is probably all of you, punch cards were literal programs, literally made out of identical size cards, where you punched, holes were punched in them, and the computer read them by feeding these things of punch cards through, which gave them the instructions that they needed to do. And we've now got to the point where virtually every computer you can buy in a average department store can crunch enormous quantities of figures and do amazing things. But at the moment we've got a lack of reliable information and records, because also it doesn't go back far enough. If we're only talking 10 or 20 years of the ability to crunch data, or people have not been recording that data, not even looking for it. Even workplace health and safety is a very, very new concept in modernity. Cultural and structural differences between countries, which make a big difference in the way things are counted, whether they are counted or not. Some governments will be very careful not to let information out. Others, and that isn't just the third world population. There's a lot of first world countries that are very careful about letting information out about that would be not so good. If even the States, it always amazes me at what goes on in the States, and little information that gets out. It takes major takes movie makers basically to go out there and make a movie about it for it to come out as something which is problematic. Many work-related diseases have multiple potential causes too, which is another thing making it difficult to determine whether the condition is work-related or not work-related. And that came, there was about 20 years ago, there was a lot of, I can't think of the name of it now. Basically, it was people just suddenly started getting totally knackered, totally tired, couldn't do things. Sorry, my ducks are awake. What the hell do they call that? Anyway, it'll come to me. But they had a real problem with it because people would say, well, this is nothing, it hasn't been seen before. And then suddenly we saw a much higher, what appeared to be an enormous rate of carpal tunnel syndrome and repetitive strain injury. All of those things are now understood as being okay. 30 years ago, even, anybody who had a bad back was, basically called a malingerer, it was sort of a malingerer's disease. Oh yeah, bad back, because it was very difficult to quantify. But it came with an enormous amount of prejudice. People who'd never worked in labouring or in heavy industry didn't have any idea what was going on. Sorry about this noise. I just can't pause it, unfortunately, because of this program. Okay, so traditional factors that are well-known causes of work-related diseases and have been seen to have a major effect on the incidence and mortality of work-related diseases include obvious things like hazardous substances. So we often focus, and I think to somewhat of a detriment, on other areas, but we focus on these things: asbestosis, silica dust, pesticides, radon from X-rays and so forth. Ionising radiation. And I'm not sure quite what the difference between ionising radiation and non-ionising radiation is, so I must admit I need to look that up. But you can do a Wikipedia one on that and see what you find out. But also noise pollution and other physical factors that all sort of fit into being problematic. Yeah, so let's have a look at a few of these. The other things you need to take into account, for instance, these are other variables that you can look at, is, do these things affect a particular age group, a particular gender? They've already pointed out that men have 2/3 or represent 2/3 of the of deaths relating to work. Shift work, overwork and stress, these are all fairly common things in the modern day of work. Communicable diseases at work is a very interesting one. As you know, I've got an interest in that. Violence at work, which you don't sort of think of, but if you've ever worked in a nursing environment or hospital environment, that can often be quite a problem, where you get patients turn violent, and sometimes for good reason. Sometimes psychiatric wards and so forth have that sort of problem as well, or where people come in and they're one ambulance workers so often have big problems with that. And I'll never forget seeing a guy who had OD'd in the Cross in Sydney, and OD'd on heroin, and he was just lying there, and I got hold of an ambulance to come and get him, because he didn't look like he was breathing. In fact, I don't think he was. And they came along, and they've got I can't remember the name of the drug they used now, Narca something I think it's called. Anyway, whatever it is, it's almost instant. It completely reverses the heroin, and within 5 seconds a person's basically back to normal. And this guy got really angry with the ambulance drivers for having knocked off his bars, even though he was dying, or literally stopped breathing. He got really upset and angry, and started throwing himself around. And child labour, though we don't have, in theory, child labour here, although a lot of local shops, you would think that was not the case. And However, certainly overseas there's a lot of child labour still going on, and it's a really difficult one that because quite often you take away child labour, so you say, look, you can't work, and this actually happened in the UK in the Industrial Revolution, whereas children used to work with their parents quite often in the mills, and they had particular jobs, maybe fairly dangerous and not particularly good jobs. Running underneath or crawling underneath the weaving looms and picking up the bits and bringing them back. And when they abolished child labour in England, it caused an enormous problem because a lot of working families depended on the money that the children were bringing into work, and also who the hell was looking after the kids during the day? No one could. The parents still had to go to work. The children couldn't work, and that therefore there was a real problem with it. I'm not saying it was not a good idea to get rid of it, but there are unintended consequences. Now, this article itself has some, and I'll put it up where I've marked out a few things which talk about some stuff, but I want to just go through to how they I'd like you to read the thing first of all, and it gives you some of the data, the attributable fractions of data for different work-related diseases, causes of death, and so what they mean by circulatory system diseases, respiratory system diseases, malignant neoplasms, which is basically cancer, and they can take quite a long time to occur, and the neuropsychiatric conditions, digestive system diseases like bowel cancer, genitourinary tract urinary system diseases, and that's a whole ballpark in itself. And they then go through what looks like, what is in fact a complex set of equations to show you how it is they're working it out. Now, if you want, and you're particularly math literate, then by all means have a look at those and play with them. But I've gone to table 2, which I think is more interesting, because what table 2 does is it takes all of the types of problems that can cause morbidity and mortality. In fact, they're only looking at mortality in this, I think. And they look at communicable diseases, malignant neoplasms, which is cancer, respiratory system diseases, circulatory system diseases, and all of these. So these are all down there, and accidents and violence, which they say a number of accidents and violence have been taken from a study basically in I think Hamulian, however you pronounce this word here, that's the person who wrote the article in 2006. And I'm not quite sure how they got to that, but it doesn't really matter, because what we're doing is we can dive into it at that depth at another time. What I'm trying to get you to do this time really is to think a little bit about how you can manipulate data and see it. Now, one of the big problems we've got here is that what we're looking at is just it's just a bunch of figures, and they don't mean anything to us except to say, if you look across these, it gives all the things down the bottom here. So EME is the established market economies, whatever that means. Okay, they do explain it. I think they do explain it, how they determine that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I suspect that means, the first world. FSE is former socialist economies. There's India, there's China, there's other Asia and islands, because quite often India is lumped in with Asia. I'm never quite sure why. Sub-Saharan Africa, which is an interesting thing to look at. Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the Middle Eastern crescent. So they've broken the world up into bits basically, where they can get information, and they've given what is a raw numbers from the data. So if you look at the total mortalities here, and I'll zoom up a bit. I hope I can zoom up. Oh yes, I can. Yeah. If you zoom up a bit here, total mortalities, and you look at it there. So the first world's, the former socialist economies, just the numbers, you're looking at 297,000 in a year. I guess this is a year. And compared to 166,000, compared to 310,000 in India. Now that's the biggest. Then of course China comes along, 460,000, you know, and then these guys all fall down as time goes on. Now, great, but essentially useless, because you can't make any comparison. So you can't see from this data anything which is a pattern. There's nothing there which is patterned. Nothing that you can, nothing dives out at you. So what I've done, is I've taken, oops, I'll get rid of this, and let's see this, and right, okay. Now I'm going to put this up as well, so this will go up on the thing. This is just a kind of Excel spreadsheet. It's a Mac version of the Excel spreadsheet, so I'm kind of hoping that it all works out, that you can know your way around Excel already enough to do some of these. It's very, very simple stuff that I'm doing it. If there's a problem with it and you just can't figure it out, then if you could be so kind as to send me an email, and I'll see if I can get a copy of Excel and from the university, and I'll do a little you know, thing showing you it on Excel as well. But it's been so long since I've used standard Excel, I can't remember, but it's got all the functions that are there. What I've done is, anyway, is that I've cut the numbers out. I actually had to bloody type them in. There's some things you just can't cut and paste, which is a real pain in the ass, but so I've typed all these things in again. There's a little bit of difference there. These here are totals. I should put that in, T-O-T-A-L-S. And just a couple of things. When you're working with a spreadsheet, always make sure that you you check your numbers by summing them up in totals and look to see whether they meet the data. That's the best way of doing it. So to do that, you just basically select a set of cells like that, and you look for a function, and the function is sum to sum of, and when you do that, it'll poke out that number as see what it's done there is it's taken all of those, and it shows you that it's taking all of those cells there into a sum. If we actually look up here, you'll see what the formula is. It's sum from B2 to B9. That's how you set it out. You can learn these, I mean, you can do them yourself quite easily. It's just, you know, you can just type them straight into the box if you want, but for the moment I'll go back to what I had before. Okay, so the totals aren't that important, right? They're just to sort of to look at. It'll tell you the total, you know, for all of the countries, but because it's totaling all countries rather than all for a country, you know, for a communicable disease, for instance, it'd be interesting to have a look at like what communicable diseases do according to each country. So we'll just have a quick look at this. So if you look at I've made a graph of this. Now I'll just scroll that down a bit. Here we are. And what I've done is on the x-axis down here, that's the x-axis, you've got the countries, and then each colour represents a particular disease. And one of the things you can see straight away is that right the way across all the countries, the biggest ones, the ones that are causing the biggest problems, apart from India, interestingly enough, but is malignant neoplasms. So cancers are a big problem right the way along. All of these green guys here, they're all major, but it still doesn't tell you much because it's problematic because it's a bit confusing to look at. It doesn't look real good. You've got to go down to this bloody you've got to look at your thing here to put that up here somewhere and drag this one across, separate them out a bit so that you can see what they look like. It's difficult to read, so I thought, okay, well, instead of doing that, what if we look at it the other way around? So I click on this and it shows you when I do that which it shows you what it's actually looking at. So that's taking all of the variables down this side here and all of the figures per country across the top, and it's giving these figures here, which still is the same problem we had before. Okay, so we were looking at it before and we had the same trouble there. We're looking at exactly the same stuff, so that hasn't changed. I haven't made it any better. What I need to do though is to see the raw numbers. The problem with raw numbers is they're just completely useless to compare from one country to another. You've got to convert them to a percentage of the total. So what you got here is the total number of people who have died resulting from these factors here. So these along here are the variables, okay, and we're just going to pick one country, the EME, the modern Western countries, and we're going to look down this and we can see that that the total number is, come back here, is 2,97525. Now what 535, what we've actually got to do is to convert that to a percent, and I've gone through and converted them to percentages, right? And so if you look at each one of these, you'll see that each one has a little formula, and this is where spreadsheets are really it's actually a really important skill to learn, is to how to do just the very basic formulas so that you can do things like work out what the percentage is. So I'm showing you the very basic kind of formula that you need, and in fact it's very easy to work it out. Here's an example, right? Let's get rid of this one here. So I'll blank that square out and I'll do a formula, the formula for percentage here. Okay, so for the first bit I'm going to do is I'm going to say to make it a formula I have to type into it equals. Okay, that's very important. All formulas start with an equals, because you're saying this cell in the spreadsheet equals something, and now you're going to have what they call operands, or operators, I like to think of them as, which are going to give me a number, a particular number, right? Now I want to find out what this number here is as a percentage of the total of deaths. So for instance, if we look at this one here, we can see that respiratory system diseases are 5.6% of total deaths. Circulatory system diseases are 25.7%, obviously much bigger. Malignant neoplasms, 55.3%. Now we're talking serious amounts. So what is communicable diseases? How do they work out? So to make it a percent, very, very simply, you do what is almost, I think it's counterintuitive. You take the smallest number, which is what you're looking at, and you divide it. So you click on the cell you want it which is the smallest number, the number that you're looking at, and you put a slash for divide, divided by the total number, and then you multiply that by 100. I've got two possums fighting to the death above me at the moment. Okay, do you see that? I'm going to give it to you again in a minute so you can do it, and that gives us 3.8%. So if you look down these, you'll see each one, normally when you click on the box it's got a formula in it, you'll see that that formula highlights the squares and gives you, you can see the malignant neoplasm is there, and then this one here, and then you multiply it all by 100 to bring it back up again to give you a percentage of the total. Okay, now let me just go back again. I'll go through those again at some stage, but essentially I want to tell you, I've got to convince you first of all that it's worth doing all of this mucking around with numbers, right? You end up then with two columns for each of the countries, right? So for instance, if I take India here, I'm taking this column and this column are India. So what I'll do is I'll just make them a colour. I shall make them green because it's an awful green. There we are. Okay, so now what you can see is you see the raw number for the communicable disease and the percentage that is of this total here. You get the idea? So that's the raw number is up there, but what is that raw number as a percentage of the total deaths in that country? And that will have some normalizing effect, some comparative effect across countries. Now it's the rudest calculation in a sense. It's very, very ropey as a way of doing it, because you're doing it, there's so many variables to change. You know, if you can imagine, between India and China and all of the others, there are just heaps and heaps of things that are problematic for it. So you don't, you know, it's a difficult, very difficult task to come up with something that's that actually gives you much accuracy. But what happens is when we then go on, we take this graph, we take those figures that we've worked out, and I'll show you, I'll do a little session on how you convert them using it. So I've now taken this table and I've extracted from each of these countries, I've just taken this, which is the percentages. You notice I've summed them at the bottom. Each one there has come to 100. They better come to 100, otherwise you've made a big mistake. That's how you test your mistakes. So there's all your percentages down there. You copy that, you make a copy of that, and then when you go to paste it in the next sheet that you're making it up on, you paste them as, now on the Mac you paste values. Okay, you can paste normal, and what you really want to do is to paste values. The reason that you paste values is if you paste anything other than values, you end up getting the formula. So the 3.8, if I click on the square, there's the formula, and that's what will get pasted, which won't make any sense to it at all. But if you go to, say, edit and copy, and then go to the next sheet or whatever, find a square that you want to put it in. Here we go, I put one there, and I want to paste. I paste a value, whoops, edit, paste values, and it comes out as a value there. You'll notice that that's 3.75. It's got far too many decimal places, so I'd have to change that to get it back down to 2 decimal places to make sense. Okay, so that's just the process. That's all we're doing there, is the process of how we get it. But what does it show us? And this is the best bit, is that it really shows us something which is much more useful in terms of comparing nations and particular types of diseases and so forth. So what we've done with this one is that I've turned the graph on an axis so that each one of these each place is given a colour, particular colour, and so we can look at them all, and we can see this one here by disease. So we can look at them and say, oh, okay, communicable diseases, which amazes me, is right up there, isn't it? So I'd like to know what those diseases are. What's knocking people off in the year 2000 in these areas? Which countries are we looking at? So the EME is very, very small, so that's not going to be a big problem. This big grey one, which is South Saharan Africa, might be AIDS. That's knocking people off in that. I don't know whether that's, or it might be something work related, but communicable diseases. Okay, so you can look at each one, and this is what you need to sort of look at to see what's going on. You can look at the grey one, like malignant. So what we're talking about is cancer. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for cancer, communicable diseases killing lots of people. Cancer doesn't kill many at all. One of the reasons is that that I would imagine that it doesn't, and this is where you've got to start making judgment calls about things. One of the reasons it doesn't kill them is because they're all dead before they get a chance to actually get cancer. Cancer's basically mostly kills people off in old age. So if you don't actually get to old age, if your age is, in your country, old age is 45 or 50, then cancer's not going to be a big deal. Do you get the idea? Same again here, respiratory system diseases. The red one, big red one, China's got problems with respiratory system diseases in comparison to most of the other countries. So here's all the countries across here. Circulatory diseases, and these become more important as you go on. The scale that we're looking at is because all of these are so enormous, we're not seeing a good good bite of this graph where we're looking at gastrointestinal system disease and so forth. You'd have to actually make the scale of the graph much, much bigger and maybe take out these factors, all of these diseases, in order to get a scaled graph to look bigger at that point there. But look, I'm going to stop at this point and I'm going to put this up because I just want you to have a look at it and play with it a bit. So I'll just show you the last sheet where this is a kind of a nicer way of looking at it, I think, or an easy way of looking at it. Here I'm just looking at nothing more than communicable diseases. So I've just taken a line across here. You can see it when I click on the graph. It does communicable diseases and it tells me what countries I'm looking at. And this way I can look at every particular one. If I wanted to just look, for instance, at neoplasms, can I just drag them down there? I think I can. Oh, whoops. There we are. So that's a cancer one, and we could go on just moving them bit by bit to have a look at each one. And you can have a look and play with that. So look, I'll put this up as it is and see how you go. It'll be all done up for you with the numbers and a whole lot. And you should be able to just play with the graphs and see how it goes from there. And then we'll come back to it once I've got my act together with a better recording program than the one I'm using at the moment. Thanks a lot. I hope I haven't bored you senseless. And sorry about the ducks. I have to say that all the time. Oh, and the possums. And the bloody parrots too, actually. See ya.